From heaven, rain hell. As the songs of the kingdoms rang out over the land, the air shook at the arrival of the invaders. Clouds cleared from their perch and let the sun in before it bent itself in wicked patterns, a sign of the malicious ether invading the realm. Michael felt these irregularities in the sky as he got ahead of his angels, and paused in a stark chill. His body felt heavier than normal. His wings, which had once the strength to beat against the world in birth maelstroms, now merely made blusters like flashes in a pan. Storms grew in the clouds and gifted a soft rain to the lavender fields. The sounds of wings paraded behind him. It was the arrival of his generals, leaders of his 7 angelic guards. Each of the guards had only brought forth a little more than 30 angels each, and each captain was now ready for the war order. Without turning, Michael spoke in a voice of thunder. "Do you feel it too?" A slight pause held weight, and was soon alleviated when Michael finished his statement. "Our power is limited by the power of that channeler." "Will it matter?" whispered an angel of the 3rd guard. "It's our job to make sure it doesn't," Michael said in a stern, almost scolding voice. Meeting the harsh tone of his voice, there was another angel, representing the 4th guard, who hovered on the wind and drew her swords in a waiting frenzy. Her hands trembled, nervous in the question of how much power she would actually have at her disposal, and the other half of her trembling, coming from the hunger to prove herself. In the wind was felt the weight of death that was to follow. Behind them processed a parade of demons and warriors coming from the kingdom. Their demonic hymns combated the bright battle hymns of the kingdom and seemed to force an almost new song altogether. In Michael's brow, furrows gathered. He grew more annoyed and perplexed in the situation. A fraction of his power, a new and unfamiliar enemy, and Lucifer. Dear God, he'd be fighting alongside Lucifer. Little did he know that Lucifer had similar thoughts of this ordeal. On the ground, the devil kept close to Jeremy, sneering at the young man whom he'd been tasked with protecting. His pride bubbled up and over at times during their march to the battlefield. How could the great musician, mighty dragon, and king of evil be made to commit to babysitting a channeler, a chick in a nest of phoenixes? His feet now stirred the smoke of death and coated the lavender and grasses in decay. He made sure to protect his procession from the effects, but like the showman he was, they were all made to bear witness to the miasma of the underworld. Lucifer could feel their adoration for his power. It felt beautiful. "Oh, chick, not yet ready to be touched by the flames. Do you even know what we are? How to use us to the advantage?" Jeremy, a few feet away from the sharp whispers, heard them as clear as day and responded with timid answers. "How could I?" His voice shook shyly from his throat. "I barely even know you, not to mention that I know nothing of most everyone else." He had now begun to relax in the carrying grasp of the procession, but he still had not shaken the mire of confusion, being dropped into a new world and made the leader of heroic spirits. "You all keep looking at me like this is normal, or like it's in my control." His voice was steadily choking back excitement, still tempered by subtle fear of the unknown. And he had a point. How could he be expected to use these aeons to their fullest if he didn't even grasp the power at hand? Lucifer's voice rang through the heads of the Aeon generals, calling them to gather on Jeremy. "We're not our own here," he lamented. "We need to put ourselves in his hands, even if we might find them incapable at the moment." The heavy air from before sank the angels to the earth, called warriors to a knee, and even caused beasts, demons, and birds to heal. Quickly, they did their part in introducing themselves, filling in most of the gaps in knowledge. Knowing was almost worse. I was a meager man to command the likes of angels, demons, and beasts of the battlefield. His thoughts didn't have long to keep him occupied. The storms of the plains intensified and began to let loose contorted dragons and vicious and mangled bodies riding atop them. A mighty smoke billowed from the clouds and touched down along the lavender. From its veil stepped armies numbering in the thousands. Jeremy saw the stances of the angels and demons change, and all at once their wings each burst full of gale-force winds that beat the young channeler's body, almost taking him from his feet. The archangel took the lead, brandishing a spear, a shield, and a thunderous cry as he crashed into hordes of the shivers. He touched down, digging his powerful legs into the ground until he had an upheaval at his feet. His spear danced and fell on the heads of enemies before he took to the skies again, this time targeting wrath beasts, as they each took their turns at trying to see what an angel tasted like. One, in particular, missed its bite and was stabbed through the head. Michael perched on the side of its head and took a second to study the field. He saw the hordes of shivers cutting into soldiers on the ground and wondered what they would do to turn the tide against this enemy that seemed to just keep coming. From the other end of the field, in the thick clouds of miasma along the ground, Lucifer wove arcana of death and torment that strangled enemies and tore them away from their fighting spirit. He, just as his angelic counterpart, was becoming angry at the perceived impossibility of gaining an advantage in this fight.
They're recycling the ether, keeping their bridges open with the ether released from death,
whispered the devil.
It's not a bad idea.
Michael groaned as the words passed through his consciousness. His demonic counterpart was correct. Traditional combat wasn't going to cut it here. All of the Aeons were sharing from a collective pool of ether, spreading their strengths along the collective. Powerful Aeons, like Michael, felt the stinging hindrance from having his power siphoned between the collective. It was the foot soldiers, those who had never sampled the skies or parted clouds with their anger, who were now feeling surges of power they had never known before. And on paper, it would seem good to spread the wealth of power throughout the army. But Michael was observing something quite to the contrary. These warriors were too timid with force, leaving its far reaches untouched and underutilized. He, a general, could feel the weight of ether it took to bring each of them here and their relative capabilities. There was so much wasted potential, it was almost maddening.
How do you see them?
Lucifer's voice called out in question to Michael. The air of his insidious chuckling could be felt through their connection. Michael recalled their conversations in heaven, watching the cherubs as they studied their hymns and praises. He was never truly at peace with the way he saw others. It felt transactional. But maybe that was what they needed right now, finding out how to find the most profitable way to use their fellows, the Aeons under their charge. Michael relaxed, feeling the seas of ether from the Aeons who fell in battle, and combed through it with his moment of reflection. It was whelming, flowing powerfully over the fields and dissipating into the environment and traveling back to its natural home in the ether of the worlds. This power could not continue to go to waste. There was no way he, Ishbel, and the other generals could carry this war only on their backs and expect to be victorious. His body, still perched atop the falling dragon, pulsed with power, focusing with Lucifer at the other end of the field to create something new. The ether folded onto itself, growing and climbing into the sky, seeming to pull the storm clouds from their bed and washing energies over the battlefield that caused the ether to regurgitate spirits and twist them into something sickening to Michael. Bodies mired in their own blood and valor rose from the lavender and roared into the storms. Michael watched as soldiers and angels shed their last hints of humanity and familiarity and rose to serve a mindless purpose, focused on violence towards their killers. Fights began to change from clashes of wills and desperation to rage-filled attacks in which Shiver were torn apart by mobs of ragged dead. Michael did not like what he saw. Each of these warriors, who valiantly gave their own lives, of their own volition, were now raised again to fight according to the needs of Michael and Lucifer's arcana. Lucifer, however, smirked, extending his hand to Michael from afar. Oh, what we can accomplish on this battlefield. He was very much at home with the essence of perpetual carnage and selfish vengeance. He also enjoyed the ether he sampled now, being allowed to taste, like fine wine, the ether of the mightiest angelic captain.